It takes a lot of obedience to get up here and share. I remember I used to go, for like 7 years, I went with the youth to camp, but we went to another camp. This one's a little bit better, more fun. But on the last night, we would go down to what we called the campfire area, and it looked over the gorge, and it was absolutely beautiful. And for some reason, they allowed us to build huge campfires. But it was always fun, and after we would dismiss the whole group, my group would stay there, and we would be around the campfire, and the kids would share what God had done. And it was always the most impactful time of camp, is being able to hear the testimony of what God is doing in your life. But again, back to that, why are we allowed to start fires in the middle of the forest in the middle of summer? I'm not quite sure. I learned this week that Smokey the Bear turned 80 on the 10th of August. Yeah. And so when I learned that, I started looking at some of his commercials that he's done over the years, and they've gotten progressively a lot better. There was one commercial back in the 60s or 70s where it was just America and then a match lit, and it said, in 1 second, America the beautiful could become America the ugly. And then it says, only you could prevent forest fires. And then there was one where there was this woman that obviously was a model, and she was talking very softly about preventing forest fires. And it zooms in on her face, and all of a sudden the mask comes off, and it's Smokey the Bear. And he said, well, if it was me, would you have listened? Only you could prevent forest fires. And then as it's gotten better, in the 80s, I guess he tried rapping, and trying to relate to the kids. And then now he has an app, I guess, and there's this commercial where they're asking, there's these two young people, and they're fighting back and forth about who knows how to put out a fire. Just douse it with water and mix it around a little bit. And they're fighting back and forth, and they're like, fine, we'll ask Smokey. And they're like, hey, Smokey the Bear, and the app comes up on the phone, and then he says, well, douse it with water and, stir it around with a stick. And then he goes on and on and on about all the things you're supposed to do to put out your fire, and then again, it's only you could prevent forest fires, okay? So I think that we've missed the point over the last 80 years, and he keeps having to remind us that only we could put out forest fires, and he's talking about how even the smallest ember from the fire that's still lit can destroy an entire forest, right? Back when they first started this campaign, it was a lot of cigarettes being thrown out windows, and some of that probably still today, and some things are accidents, but other things are just the smallest of embers can take out an entire forest. So last week we discussed being tangled, and how our lives are tangled, and this web we weave of making choices without asking God's direction. And we've been in Proverbs, and like I said, Proverbs kind of is telling us what's good and what's bad, what's right and what's wrong. It's giving us direction. It's being very straightforward, very blunt about what God expects from us. And this week, we're going to talk about how the web we weave with our tongue. All right, and we're going to talk about the fires that our tongue starts. Even maybe the smallest of embers could take out an entire community, could take out somebody's entire life. So most of us are not strangers to gossip. We have listened to it, we have spread it, and we have probably been victims of it in some way. So what is gossip? Gossip is spreading of information that, one, is not yours to tell, and two, has not confirmed to be true, okay? Most of the time, when we're telling another person's story, we're also doing it with a sense of judgment. That's what gossip is. We're judging another person's life. And rumors are dangerous because people feel no responsibility to what they're passing on as hearsay, right? It doesn't matter because it's not going to affect their life. They're just dropping something here, right? I'm just going to throw a quarter in the bucket and walk away. It doesn't affect their lives. It just makes them feel better for a moment. Gossip can be anything from talking about personal matters to statements that defame or injure somebody's reputation and the well-being of other people. So it could be something very small, like, oh my gosh, did you see that guy? He had a rip in his pants. Joe had a rip in his pants at church. And I think that Joe had a rip in his pants at church because they don't fit him anymore, but he doesn't know they don't fit him anymore. Something just as small as that doesn't seem like it's very big. But oftentimes when we're doing this, it's because we're missing something in our own lives, right? And I've told my kids their entire lives that there's 3 sides to every story. There's side A, there's side B, and then someplace in the middle there's the truth. And you're never going to get the truth from anybody because it's all muddled up with the tangled stuff in their head, okay? So many years ago, the Lord convicted me of gossip. Now, I wasn't gossiping. I had gotten through the whole sin of gossiping, where I'm sitting down with people over coffee and just talking about everything. But I was in the grocery store checkout line, and there's all these magazines, and they all have big words on the front and pictures. But most of them aren't true. And so the Lord convicted me at the grocery store not to read the headlines on the magazines because all I was doing was making judgments of people, and that information wasn't confirmed to be true. That was just somebody selling a magazine. So sometimes I have to literally check out at the grocery store with my back to the magazines so that I don't try to see what it says. What does George Clooney have right now? Who is he seeing? Oh my goodness. What happened to Angelina Jolie? I don't even know these people. I go to a hair salon that's very old-fashioned. Like the ladies, all they do is talk about everything. And my hairstylist is very cranky when I don't like to be included in the talk about that stuff. And then she's like, so what are we going to talk about? I'm like, well, I don't know. My hair is still gray. We could keep going that way. I have friends that are no longer my friends because at some point, all of our relationship was about talking about other people. And when I decided not to do that anymore, we didn't have anything else to talk about. My grandmother, who is not alive anymore, but she loved to talk about people. And it just proves that gossip is you're not safe in your family. Your family's going to gossip about you too. And so my grandmother stopped calling me when I would not fuel her fire of gossip. She was like, okay, I guess we're not talking anymore. I'm like, okay, I love you too, Grandma. But I've also been the victim of gossip. When I left my staff position at LifePoint, gossip began. Because it's not like I stood on stage and told everybody what God was doing in my life. I mean, I told them that God had called me out, but that wasn't good enough. So a little fire started. People couldn't understand why, if everything was going so well, God would call me out of LifePoint. And then when my ex-husband left, that fire got bigger. Because people didn't know my personal life like that, so they needed to start putting in their own parts of the story to figure out what's wrong. Because there has to be something terribly wrong with me if this is happening. And then I had some hard choices to make because some people very close to me made some really bad decisions. And then I had to make some hard choices. And then that fire got bigger and bigger because there still has to be a problem. They don't know my entire life, but the problem has to be in them, right? And people start talking about Jess and what Jess was doing and how Jess was terrible. But Jess wasn't even a part of those things. But we need to detour the real problem, right? We need to look away from the real problem, and this fire is already burning, so let's add fuel to it. When I got remarried, oh my gosh, the fire started again. When I ended up pregnant with twins, let's keep going. All right? The fire was 10 feet tall. The fire was 10 feet tall. It was huge all along. And the whole time, you know what the Lord said to me? This lasted years, a couple years. And the Lord said, you just keep your mouth shut. You have nothing to argue against. You stay out of it and keep your mouth shut. People would call me to tell me what other people were saying about me, and I was told to keep my mouth shut. I couldn't defend myself. I couldn't anything. Just keep my mouth shut. People who knew me and said they loved me decided they didn't because of what they were hearing other people say about me. Family members, because they decided they were believing what other people said about me. People who didn't know me were painting ugly pictures of me. Let's just keep adding fuel to the fire. Just keep making it bigger. And I had one job: keep my mouth shut. So why do we gossip? We gossip to feel better about ourselves. We gossip to get the light off of us. 9 times out of 10, I would say it was to get the light off of us. To connect with people. It's true. So that we have a common ground. And to make others hurt as bad as we do. We won't admit it, but if we're in pain and we're hurting, we want others to as well. And why do we listen to gossip? To feel better about ourselves, to get the light off of us, and to connect with others. That's it. Gossip is a deadly weapon. Just like that fire, just takes one match, and America the Beautiful is America the Ugly. Just like that. So we are in, like I said, the book of Proverbs, and we talked about last week. It's a very important book, and there's very important things that the Lord talks to us about and says over and over again. And we could literally spend months in this book cover to cover. And there's so many things that I would like to talk about. I threw some of them out there to my family yesterday. What was something I threw out? I was telling them about the flaming arrows of jokes. Like, when you're a joke teller, you're just throwing flaming arrows at people. Or a man who isolates himself seeks his own desires, and he rages against all wise judgment. Do not isolate yourself. Or can a man scoop fire into his lap and without his clothes being caught on fire? No. So there's so many things I want to talk about in Proverbs, but we don't have time for it. Today, Proverbs chapter 6, verses 16 through 19 say, there are 6 things the Lord hates. 7 are detestable to him: haughty eyes, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked schemes, feet that are quick to rush into evil, a false witness who pours out lies, and a person who stirs up conflict in the community. A person who stirs up conflict in the community. This is presented as the result of the previous 6 things that were just named off. It's the ultimate among them all. It is the one that's highest among the things that God hates and regards as detestable. A person who stirs up conflict in the community. Stirring up conflict in the community can be your family, your work environment, your church, your neighborhood, any part of your life that you're integrated in. It doesn't have to be necessarily the community of Eugene or, your neighborhood. And it's lies and misrepresentations. It's a gossiper is somebody who works hard to make another think badly of others. And we're going to be mostly tearing apart Proverbs 26, verses 20 through 22, because this is where the writer compares gossip to fire. So verse 20, without wood a fire goes out. Without a gossip, a quarrel dies down. So have you ever built a fire before? Anybody? Okay. So if you've built a fire, then you know that you need wood, but that you need some kind of way to get this fire started. and then you need a flame, right? Usually, you don't just put a match to the wood and it just automatically starts up. You'll need kindling, or you need some grass area, or sometimes you just need newspaper. I know we used to do newspaper and kindling all the time to build fires in our house when I was growing up. But the wood is what fuels the fire. Your fire will not continue to burn if you don't continue to give it fuel, right? So it's the same with gossip. Without a gossiper, gossip cannot continue on. A gossiper is the fuel to the fire, is how it keeps going and getting bigger. James 3:6 says that the tongue is fire. The tongue is what helps produce the gossip. Fire has good purposes sometimes, right? To keep us warm, to cook, to clean. And it also really looks beautiful. Like, we're not going to lie, fire is beautiful. But fire can be deadly. And we know that for fact from a few years ago, right? It could take one's life. It could take one's entire home and belongings. It could take an entire mountainside out. It could take out an entire community. That community that was taken out a few years ago of the McKenzie River, that's the one I grew up in. Everything gone. It's so devastating to drive through there now and see what was not there anymore. The tongue has a good purpose. Praise, worship, uplifting words, heartfelt songs. We could come up with a lot of good things from the tongue. But the tongue that gossips not only wounds a person's reputation, but it gives a fatal stab to their deepest love for people and brings death to their hearts. If you're somebody that has been the victim of gossip, you start to believe you can't trust people. You start to believe that you shouldn't be in community with people. You start to believe that people can't see you for who you really are. Gossip is like a fire, uncontrollable after a certain point. So there's a point where we could stomp it out. There's another point where you need to bring in bigger tools. You need to bring in help. You can't do it yourself. Because of the death it brings, no one should ever be someone who gossips, nor shall we give any support to those who do. We need to stomp it out before it could get big enough. And that could be uncomfortable. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. But you have the opportunity in the beginning to drown it with water, stomp it out, stir it around, ask Smokey what to do. Verse 21, as charcoal to embers and as wood to fire, so is a quarrelsome person for kindling strife. Just as fire does not create itself, trouble among people does not create itself. It takes some sort of fuel. So as we've already pointed out, trouble oftentimes takes gossip, and gossip takes a gossiper, someone who is going to speak it, someone who's going to listen to it. It's not only one person. Somebody's listening. It has a maker, and that's a gossiper. Some versions of the Bible call this a talebearer. It has a talebearer. It has somebody that's telling stories. We are storytelling people. We like stories. If we don't have all the information and our stories have blank spots in it, we're going to fill in those blank spots with whatever we come up with to make it a story. And a lot of times we like a good story, juicy story. So immeasurable is the damage done to those who deliberately use their tongue to harm the reputations of others. The damage done by somebody spreading false information or what they don't even know even if they don't know it's false information, of other people brings death. And I keep saying that, but I want you guys to understand how important it is that we listen to what we're saying and what we're listening to. There's a commentator that said, those who by insinuating a person's character or revealing secrets and misrepresenting words and actions do what they can to make relations, friends, and neighbors jealous of one another, to alienate them from one another, and sow discord among them, are to be banished out of families and all societies, and then trouble will surely cease, as the fire will go out when it has no fuel. People will better understand one another and come to better temper. Old stories will soon be forgotten when there are no new ones told to keep up the remembrance of them, and both sides will see how they have been imposed upon by a common enemy. So do we need to banish people? No, we don't need to banish people. But if we don't give attention to what they're saying, if we recognize it as gossip, they will stop. And if they really need to gossip, they will leave on their own. Plain and simple. Verse 22 says, the words of a gossip are like choice morsels. They go down to the inmost parts. This is the second time this exact verse was said in Proverbs. So again, very important, right? The first time we find it in Proverbs 18:8, says the exact same thing. The words of a gossip are like choice morsels. They go down to the inmost parts. The Lord doesn't repeat something if he doesn't think you didn't hear it the first time, right? It is as if there is a great importance to these words. There's a warning not to tolerate this kind of action in our lives. Not to gossip and not to listen to gossip. There is an importance of keeping the peace and welfare of those people around us, handling their lives with care, fighting for people in your own minds and fighting for people outside of your minds. You may not necessarily like a person. Oh, but Pastor Jess, we're Christians. We like everybody. No. I know better than that. Okay? You may not like a person. You may not agree with the decisions that they're making in their lives, but you can still fight for them in your own head. You can still fight for them out in the world. And I'm not saying throw down with people, but you could refuse to get into the gossip. You could refuse to hear the juicy stuff. A gossip's message tastes good, though. It's almost irresistible. If you think about tasty treats, you know that for most people, it is hard to resist even just a nibble of something that they find very desirable. Very difficult to not have just a bite. It's the same thing with gossip. It is so difficult, even for the most upright person, not to hear what's going on in somebody else's life, not to gossip. It's very difficult to tell somebody to stop talking that you don't want to hear what they have to say. It's almost uncomfortable. My daughter, both my older daughters, they like to please people. So to tell somebody, hey, I don't like what you're saying, that's going to make them uncomfortable. They'll do it, but it's going to make them uncomfortable. They don't have a problem telling me every time I'm rude to somebody. I think that's where they should be the most uncomfortable. Do not check your mom. In some circles, and we talked about this a little bit, in some circles like celebrity news, people thrive on gossip. Organizations thrive on gossip. But that does not change the character of the person who is spreading the gossip. It doesn't change the things that are going on inside of them. And I'm not saying that, oh, the gossiper is so terrible. There are things happening inside that we can't even fathom. There are reasons why they feel that they need to tell somebody else's story. There's a reason why people feel they need to listen to somebody else's story. There's something missing. Most of the time it's God. But it does not change the character of the person. It does not change that God detests gossip and the person that stirs up conflict. And you may think that you just listen and you do not repeat it, but what do you think is happening in your heart when you're listening to something about somebody else? What do you think? Right here it says, like choice morsels, it goes down to the innermost parts. That means that it goes down deep inside of you. It alters the way that you think and feel about that person. You may know that person very well. Somebody comes and whispers something in your ear, and it goes down deep. And it starts to alter the way you think about them. It starts to alter the way you feel about them. It starts to make you question if they are who they say they are. Even if that information is not true and not confirmed. Our brain doesn't care about that. Now, I want you to think about this. A person you know and a person you love, and you hear something terrible about this person. You're told these things with great confidence. So, sure, they have to be true, right? You take them in for consideration. You talk them over with other people. And the deeper and deeper it goes, the more and more you decide that this person you know and love is a monster. All the while, all the things that you've heard about them aren't true. All the while, all the things you heard about them were hurting their lives. We're killing parts of them. We're making it hard for them to go out their front door. You have become their judge and their executioner. Now, you've heard a little bit, but when new juicy information comes, you need to hear more. So you can continue to fuel that dislike for that person. So that you can continue to justify the way you feel about them. If the first things were true, then everything else you hear afterwards is true. And not once do you pause to consider the validation of the information that you're hearing, or pause to consider the person that you so loved and knew. The damage the gossip brings is great. He who takes away a man's good name kills him alive and ruins him and his prosperity. Not all people could come back from that. When you are the person being gossiped about, you see it in people's eyes. The distaste, the coldness, the looks up and down. People are busy eating up all the false, tasty morsels. And in turn, you're dying inside. You're trying to keep on a smile, trying to not fight back because it will only make matters worse. And nobody sees it. Nobody cares. A person's future can be in your hands. Their entire lives could be in your hands. So do you know the pain of gossip? Have you isolated yourself because people were speaking ill of you? And it wasn't even half true? Let's be real for a second. Have you isolated yourself because people were speaking ill of you and it was true? That hurts too. And it's usually not their information to give. I'm really, truly sorry if you've had to if you've been on the bad end of gossip, I'm really, truly sorry. If you have felt distance between other people, if you felt like isolation from people, if you've felt the pain of falsified information or even true information being spread about you to others. I'm very disappointed when we start gossiping. Because your words, just for your own pleasure, are nothing but destruction. When you sit and talk about other people's lives, you are wasting your own. Proverbs 18:21 says, "The tongue has the power of life and death." This pretty much sums up everything I've been talking about this morning. Just like last week and many weeks before that, I have preached, you get a choice, okay? Are you going to be a life-giving person or are you going to be a death-giving person? The book of Proverbs is all about those choices. And sometimes it sucks to talk about. I get the privilege of getting to do it. But you know what? I don't get that privilege lightly. It means that I have to be tested in the fire each and every time before I bring something before you guys. You know, I would hope that if I came up here to deliver a word from the Lord and I wasn't living in it, that the Lord would just combust me into flames right there. That's how serious it is. That's how serious it is. I don't want to be standing up here a liar. I tell you guys I'm an open book. Partly because I don't want gossip, but partly because I want to do real life with everybody. That's what we're here for. If we can't do real life together, then we feel like we're alone. Then we make up stories. I'd rather just you guys all know. Let me tell you what's going on in my life. I'm not embarrassed by it. As humans, we like stories. I already said this. We're going to fill in those blanks. And it's like looking at social media, right? We're only getting a snapshot for a second of what's happening, and then we're trying to figure out what the rest of the story is. Because none of the pictures show, I wrote this down. None of the pictures show his wife, so they must be having a lot of trouble. Okay, let's figure out what's going on. Well, the pictures on social media don't show his wife, so they're obviously having marital trouble. And oh my gosh, well, was he talking to that teacher at school the other day? Okay, so all of a sudden he's having an affair because his wife's pictures aren't on social media. When really she's just very insecure and doesn't want her pictures shown at the moment in life. How many people are insecure about their looks? That's real. But the other thing's better, right? She lost weight way too fast, so she must have had surgery. Okay? Their kids have behavioral problems. So this must be that they don't get enough attention at home. That's definitely it. We don't need to make up stories. We don't need to pass around stories. We can say no to others when they're trying to tell us other people's stories. We can share our own stories. What did we just do this morning? We heard testimony from Logan who went to camp. He shared his story with us, all the parts. That's what our life's about, sharing our stories and our testimony. And yes, not everybody needs to hear everything about you. Not everybody's safe. But you can share your story. We can stomp out fires. Can everybody practice stomping out a fire for me? Okay, ready? Stomp out fire. Stomp out fires. We don't need it to happen. We can speak life into the world. We can be brave. We can get uncomfortable sometimes. We can fight for other people. Fight for other people in our brain, and fight for other people all around us. When we start to hear something, we can say, hey, I just don't want to talk about that right now. Thank you. I could have the worship team come up. And I was thinking about some of the things. Part of the reason why gossip happens is because some people, don't tell the whole story. Some people only tell a couple people, and then things start going everywhere. Well, we have big news in our family. So I figure we should just do it while we have a mic in hand. So, Jordan and Adriana are expecting their first baby. And yes, they still live in Wilsonville. Yes, she's still going to George Fox. Yes, that means that Tara and I are grandmas. And Christopher and Josh are grandfathers. And how happy I am that the Lord has said, you guys get to keep filling this earth with your people. You guys keep getting to speak into the minds of the young ones and spread my kingdom. See, that's one way to spread the kingdom of God without having to, be slanderous and stuff like that. Oh, come on, Adriana. It is said that the evil tongue slays three. It slays the slanderer, the slandered, and the listener. Proverbs 21, verse 23 says, the one who guards his mouth and tongue keeps himself out of trouble. It's all about self-control. It's all about saying no. If you have been the subject of other people's gossip, then you know how all it takes is one person not wanting to hear it and stopping it. And in all honesty, if you are really that concerned about what you heard was true, just go to the source and say, you know what, I'm not trying to gossip. I heard this, and so I just want to talk to you in person about it. People get hurt and make silly choices to make themselves feel better, and usually it brings down others. Let's not get mad at them about it. Don't be mad at the person. Be mad at the sin. Doesn't mean that we need to indulge with them. We need to lift them up. We need to call them higher. What people need is the truth of the Lord to go down into their innermost parts and be filled with the words of the Lord. That's what they need. We don't need other people's stories and information. And we talked about it last week, and it applies to everything every week. What we're missing in our lives is God's word, God's love, the Lord speaking through us. He wants to use you to better this world. And that starts with bettering ourselves. And the Lord, He is your strength. He could be your words when you don't have any. He could be the love that you don't feel like you have enough of. Because we sang the song, The Well, and we're going to reprise it in a minute, but it never runs dry. What He has for you never runs dry. So when you think that you don't have enough to stop the gossip, when you think you don't have enough to get through when you're in pain, when you don't think you have enough power and strength, or you don't have the words, God does. You don't have to worry about that. He's never going to run out of it. You need to remember one thing. He loves you. He chose you. And He will use you. And you need to remember that only you can prevent gossip fires.